Welcome, my friends in the Force. Galen Marek, also known by his codename Starkiller, was arguably one of the most powerful Force users in his era, with both of his parents serving as Jedi during the last days of the Old Republic as they knew it. Inheriting the Force sensitivity of both of his parents, it was no secret that Galen would grow up to be a powerful wielder of the Force, something that the Dark Lord Darth Vader would go on to notice as well by the time he had first been within the vicinity of the young boy. For years, Galen would go on to train under Darth Vader's brutal and unforgiving regime. However, despite basically torturing the boy for most of his childhood with the intense training, Galen's pull to the light side of the Force ultimately prevailed and led him to embrace his Jedi heritage and would go on to sacrifice himself for the fledgling Rebel Alliance in order for their leaders to escape the first Death Star at the end of the first Force Unleashed game. As far as we are now aware, this would mark the end of the original Galen Marek's life, but his former master and Dark Lord Darth Vader had other plans for the now deceased Marek. As we all know, Vader would go on to create many clones of the former Starkiller in order to once again produce an apprentice powerful enough to help him in overthrowing Emperor Palpatine. For the purpose of this video, I wanted to revisit the Starkiller cloning project and how in retrospect was a complete and utter disaster. But before we dive further though, if you're a fan of Star Wars lore primarily centered in the EU, then consider subscribing to our channel as this is the content that we primarily like to focus on. And if you enjoyed the topic of this video, don't be shy and feel free to leave a like as it does help out the channel a great deal. Now, why did the Starkiller cloning project result in a disaster? As we know, Darth Vader was not willing to just let go of the incredible Force potential that Galen had, despite him already having passed on at the hands of Sidious during the final events of the first Force Unleashed video game. Shortly after these events had transpired, Vader had taken a trip to the cloning facilities of the planet Kamino and had the body of the now deceased Galen Marek in his possession. With his former apprentice's DNA, Vader had begun a secret cloning project away from the prying eyes of the Emperor and had attempted to create a clone of the original Galen in order for that clone to take his place as another apprentice. However, a few problems arose with this decision. Several of the first clones that were created were fairly substandard to what Vader had originally hoped for, resulting in some of the clones being completely deformed, though still a few possessed a powerful connection to the Force but had little to no control over it whatsoever. On top of this, Vader did not have as much time to dedicate himself to train the Force-sensitive clone, which led the Dark Lord to have the Kaminoans implant old training memories of the original Galen Marek in order to basically speed train them in everything Vader had taught Galen, which took the original Marek over a decade to master. It was through these memory flashes that these clones really began to lose their sanity. Although cloned from a specific being, the clone itself will be aware to a certain extent that they are an entirely different entity altogether. However, when implanted with the memories of someone they had no prior knowledge of being, as if they had lived that very moment, is what drove the clones of Starkiller completely insane. And due to the imperfections when it came to the accelerated growth, most of the clones created would not survive more than a few days or weeks at a time, with the first success being documented to have survived up to 13 days in isolation since its creation. And as we all know, this success would result in the creation of the Starkiller clone that would take the center stage in the second game of the Force Unleashed. But let's analyze this particular clone a bit deeper. One of, if not the only successful clone created from the original Galen Marek, strong in the Force and very much coherent in comparison to the rest of the other clones created. However, this iteration of Starkiller would not be exempt from experiencing the same memory flashes from the original Starkiller, like the other clones had experienced before him, and due to his strong connection to the Force, he was able to even recall the smell of a forest on fire. But the clone did not only inherit his predecessor's memories and power in the Force, but also his pull to the light. Most specifically, his pull to Juno Eclipse, the captain of the Rogue Shadow and the original Galen Marek's love interest. Because the clone was implanted with all of Marek's memories, this resulted in the clone developing an infatuation for Juno, which at this point was the only thing that made any real sense to the Starkiller clone. Because of this, Vader could not produce a clone as powerful as the original Starkiller, whose loyalty was only to that of the dark side of the Force. This had led Vader to do something that most would consider unnatural. Although during his time, Vader had not directly met him before, he had sensed the presence of the Sith apprentice known as Darth Maul, a powerful agent of the dark side in his own right, but most importantly, his absolute loyalty to the darkness. Most specifically, he was loyal to Darth Sidious, fiercely loyal in fact, something that Vader looked to replicate with the Starkiller Clone. With all of this in mind, Vader had given the go-ahead for the creation of a clone whose genetic material would be half of the original Starkiller, with the other half being that of Darth Maul's own genetic material, resulting in the creation of a clone that would be known as Maul-killer. Maul-killer had the facial and body structure of Galen Marek mixed in with the DNA of a Zabrak, which changed his overall appearance drastically. His skin would be silver in coloration, accompanied with black tattoo markings across his face and body, with his head sporting the horns common for a male of the Zabrak species. This clone was in fact superior to all of the others previously created, as it was far stronger and faster and more agile than the original Galen ever was, but most importantly, he was aligned completely to the dark side. But my friends, there was an issue with this particular clone, one that would prove far more problematic than Vader would have anticipated. While being successful in producing a clone that perfectly blended the physical characteristics of Galen and Maul, Vader had hoped that this clone would inherit the best traits of both genetic materials, and while this was the case, the clone had also inherited the worst parts as well. Because of the clone's strong connection to the dark side, the darkness had completely dominated his mind, essentially turning his brain into mush, and him turning into a violent monster of pure hatred because of this. Maul-killer would attack anything that carried a pulse, including Lord Vader himself. Quickly realizing that no force on the entire galaxy could hope to control this hybrid monstrosity, Vader had sent a squad of stormtroopers to put down Maul-killer. However, Maul-killer would take out each and every one of them, forcing Vader's hand. The Maul-killer clone was finally put down after these events. It is not confirmed in any source what Vader had done with the original Galen Marek's body. However, it is safe to assume that the Dark Lord could have kept his genetic material in case he ever decided to unleash another Starkiller clone upon the galaxy, though unlikely given the previous repercussions that came with doing so. So it would be safe to assume that Vader would abandon the idea completely. That's going to do it for this video, my friends, but I would like to know, what are your thoughts on the Starkiller cloning project? Was it a disaster, or could have been seen as a minor success given the creation of the Starkiller clone that would go on to embrace the light side and fight for the rebellion? If you have made it this far into the video, thank you so much for tuning into the channel. It really means the world to me, and remember, my friends, the Force will be with you, always.